Hey, how's everybody doing? And today, the Melbourne Live show, as you can see, the setup is slightly different because I have kind of finally managed to get this whole setup all done. And so, welcome to the show itself. And I'm so glad to be able to share with you this thing here today because today it's episode 87. And in today's episode, what I really like to talk to you about is this idea of why documentation is probably the thing that is going to lead you to success. And the way to think about this is the following. If Why would you want to have documentation, right? I mean, it's like, why must you document everything itself? And in fact, that is the purpose and the reason for this show. Because when I came up with the whole idea of doing this show itself, one of the main thing that I wanted to be able to do was to document the entire process and to document and to share the entire process that I have with you. And so the core idea behind this show really is to be able to share with you what I've learned and really to give you the insights into what you can do in terms of things, in terms of how I built this 1 person, 1 million, all things digital business, right? And so if and on this show itself, what I talked about, it's what I've learned and how, while in the process of building this 1 person, 1 million all digital business. At the same time, I would also be sharing with you strategies and tips, as well as the tools that I use to help me arrive there. And so, if this is something that you are looking forward to, if this is something that you think can potentially help you, then definitely considering subscribe or liking my Facebook page. Well, and as you probably know, this episode is sponsored by Catalytic Horses. And Catalytic Horses, it's the course that give you actionable advice so that you are able to fulfill your digital ambition. So that's catalytic courses. If you want to find out more about how you can take advantage of some of the free courses that are made available on catalytic courses, make sure you check out the website at catalyticcourses.com. Right. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's segment itself. So today's segment, what I really like to talk to you about is documentation. Now, before we go into why do we want to do documentation, I think a bigger question that you probably have is what is the deal with documentation? Before we get into that, I'd just like to kind of give you an idea of where the documentation come from. So the documentation has always been with us, right? Even during the ancient times, whereby the Egyptians were inscribing on the tombs and underground to kind of document what was life like at that point in time. And that proved to be extremely valuable because generations later, we are still able to understand, although not as perfectly as the Egyptian would have hoped it to be. But the point is that we were able to understand what was going on in the lives um, of the Egyptians itself at that point in time. And so I think it's really an ancient thing that has been used for a long time, And right now, how what we can do is we can really think about why we want to document the project that we are doing, so that there are a few reasons behind that. So number one reason could be, you wanted to, if you want to replicate that your success, assuming you go out there and you launch a successful project itself. And so if you want to be able to replicate that success, ideally what you want to do is really to be able to get yourself to write down that sequence. And then of course with that sequence itself, that is when you are able to replicate that success. And so it's really crucial to be able to document that, so that if you want to replicate your success, there is a place to go. The other reason why documentation is so crucial is because if something have gone wrong during a project itself, and you want to kind of go back to reviewing what went wrong, going back to your documentation, it's going to help, because you would then be able to review and see what worked, what did not work, what you should do more of, what you should do less of. And so that is the core idea behind this entire process itself. Now, the third key benefit of why you should be thinking about um, documenting your process itself, it's because of this, right? You probably want to be able to teach, and at some point in time, teach what you know to the people that could be your potential customers, for example. And so as a result of that, if you have something that is documented, you can actually pull that out very quickly, and then to be able to use that to present to your learners. And so you already have some kind of a curriculum from there. So that being said, I think documentation is so crucial, that it cannot be undermined itself. So for today's session itself, what I want to do is to give you my way of actually doing the documentation. So if you're ready, let's dive into it. So first thing first, I was looking at, following up from yesterday, I was looking at some niches, and I want to see how I could kind of go deeper into it. So I have an approach that I use that I've learned from some other people. I've put in all these approaches together, and what I did manage to come up with was the ability to go through the whole process itself. So when I think about documentation, there are essentially three things that I think about when I am looking at documentation. So number one is that I want to make sure that three things are being taken care of when it comes to documentation. So what are these three things? Number one is I want to make sure that when I document something, I capture the principle behind why I do what I do. Right. So that is so crucial that I cannot emphasize on that. So once you know the principle behind it, you are then able to replicate the success again and again and again. And so that's first thing. Now the second thing that I would document would be the approach, which means the manner in which I would carry out my research and my validation. And that is the way that I would definitely want to do that. So that is the approach that I take itself, right? And then of course the third thing that I do is I want to be able to capture the procedure of how I get it done. And so in this aspect of when it comes to, for example, the validation of the ideas, the first step that I do is I ask myself, what is the core principle behind that? Now, another way to think about that is to ask yourself this question: What would happen if you do not validate your ideas? Now, speaking from experience, I can tell you that if you do not validate your ideas, what's going to happen is you are probably going to waste your time, energy, and resources into building something that potentially no one wants. And so I've done that myself. And please, do yourself a favor. Please do not do that to yourself because it's painful, and sometimes it may be catastrophic, right? So make sure you kind of stay away from that. So that's number one. And number two, it's that when if you're thinking about starting a business in a brick and mortar manner, you will probably be very, very careful because a lot of money is at stake. You need to get a shop, you need to get inventory, you need to have pay rental, this and that. So there is a lot of things to consider, and so that may require you to be a little bit to do a bit more due diligence to ascertain whether that idea is valid before you kind of jump in. Now, of course, the other thing that when we're talking about leveraging the internet to create this all digital business, the core idea behind that is that the barriers to entry, it's actually very, very low. Arguably, anyone and everyone who wants to start a digital business can do so. Now, the problem with that is the following: because anyone could start. Excuse me. I'm sorry. This is what happened when you do live. It's the first time it's ever happened to me. Well, there is always a first time, right? So back to where we were talking about being in a place where you have low barriers to entry. It is crucial that you want to think like a like an investor. You cannot just think like a businessman, right? And worst case, and worst, you cannot think like a consumer. All right. So just because you would buy this product doesn't mean your customers will buy the product. Now you got to think like a businessman at the next level. And so if when you think like a businessman, that's where you are saying that will this be able to help me make a profit? And what I'd like to encourage you to do is to think like an investor. And if like I have a checklist to help you go through that because leveraging my past experience as a CEO of an early stage.com where fundraising is part of my responsibility. And so those are some of the things that you will have to consider when you are looking at validating your idea. So that's really crucial. So so the principle behind that is simply this: you need to think like an investor, and you need to make sure that your ideas have legs, because until and unless you have validated your ideas, you should not start on the business, which means you should not build anything until people have said, yes, I will pay for what you are going to build, or I will pay for what you're going to build, or they're going to give you money and ask you to build that product itself. So that's something that you really want to be able to do so, right? So that's the principle behind it. Now, the next part, let's talk about the approach. Now, the approach that I take is actually very simple, because the main thing that I want to be able to establish is that there is demand, and there is people buying it. So when we talk about demand, the key idea behind that is the following. Just like if you have a shop in a shopping mall, your profitability will depend on the level of demand that the consumer have for your product. Now, of course, people may have demand for what you have to offer. The question is, why must people go to your shop? So I always love this argument put up by my mentor. He say that, yeah, many people come to me and say that, well, they want to start a restaurant. And when I meaning my mentor, when I asked them why they didn't want to start a restaurant, their response was this: because people need to eat. So his follow up answer was, yes, that is true that people need to eat. But the question is, why must people eat at your restaurant? Right? So, why must people eat at your restaurant itself? So, first, you must establish that there is a demand, that people want this thing. Next, you then have to ascertain why people must buy this thing from you. And in order to answer the question, those are some of the steps that there are some steps that you need to take. So once we have established the principle, which is you want to think like an investor, we have come down to the approach, which means that we are validating that there is demand and there are buyers out there. And so to do that, what are some of the procedures that you have to do in order to arrive at that? And so one of the tools that I have been using, and I would recommend that you use it, is a free tool. That tool, it's called Google Trends. So Google Trends, as many of you know, gives you results of what people are searching for, and you can dive deep into that area itself, right? And so Google Trend is the first place that I go to. One of the key things that I look at is I want to make sure that the demand has some level of sustainability. So, for example, if you were looking at fidget spinners, you probably see that the spike in demand was only for a very short period of time. And afterwards, it kind of dies down. But in this case here, what you want to find out is that is there a constant demand? Because, like I mentioned earlier on, only when there is a constant demand or there is a predictable amount of demand, that if and only if you have that, that's where it tells you that yes, this market, it's possible for you to pursue because there is predictability, right? And so in business, we all need predictability. We need to know that next month this is what we're going to get. We're not going to sit here and wait for things to happen. So that's the first tool that I use. Now, of course, after that, what I would typically do is that I will look at what are some ads that people are running, right? Because that acts as an indication for me that people, the reason why advertisers are advertising is because there are people who are buying. And so where I go to, it's, there are a few places. One, of course, is just typing in the keywords to tell me whether are there Google ads placed in the search. The other way, of course, is as I showed you earlier. I go to Facebook ads library to get a better sense of what are some of the ads going out itself. And of course, after that, once I have done all that, that is where I would be able to look at the competition, which is another topic altogether. So before we go into competition, that is what you minimally must do to validate your ideas. And so the tool that I use to help me capture all my documentation is actually Notion. Notion is a great tool. It's a no-code tool that gives me the flexibility and the ability to document my project and to be able to help me keep track of what's working and what's not working, and Notion is a great tool in and of itself. And so that's something that I would really encourage you to find out. And so, that's so I have shared with you why you should be looking at documentation, and I also share with you the approach that I take in terms of doing documentation. Let me know, how do you do documentation, and if at all, and if you need help in documenting your business, your processes itself, um, get in touch with me, because I can definitely help you with that process itself. All right. And so with that, also let me know, what do you think of the setup that you see here, right? I mean, this is actually my computer screen. This is an old Apple Cinema display. As you can see, once you change the place where you stream, you need to make a lot of adjustment, which is why I wanted this setup done so that I could move this around, and I could go to another corner of the house. I could go to another place to do my live streaming, and so I don't have to be stuck, um, you know, on my desk the whole time. And so let me know what you think about this setup itself, what you like, what you didn't like. Um, and someday I'll give you a run through of behind the scene what this setup looks like. Okay, with that, thank you for watching, and this is the Melvin Live Show. Take care, my friends, and I'll see you in the next one.